Hi there, in this video we're going to take a look at the advanced mode of the Lightning Conductor. So in the previous video we had a look at the quick configuration, how we could use that across different types of SharePoint lists and libraries and also some graph entities as well. But it was very generic in terms of how that content would be accessed and also how it would be viewed as well. So if you're using maybe custom columns, or you've got custom content types, or even custom lists, or you want to create your own graph query, or you want to be able to select custom columns or modify different types of JSON view, then you need to be in the advanced mode. And that's what we're going to take a look at here. But what we're going to do is just have a quick overview of it so that you can find your way around the advanced mode and what all the different options do. And then in subsequent videos, we're going to dive in deeper into the specific data sources and also into the specific use view types as well. So let's jump into it. So what we're going to do is first of all click configure in the Lightning Conductor. So I've already got the web part on page. We're already in edit mode. And of course, clicking onto configure, as we learned in the previous video, is going to take me into the quick configuration. What we're going to do is hit the advanced mode button. So nothing has been saved or configured. We're just starting from scratch. Now, what you'll see inside the advanced mode is on the left hand side we've got 4 different tabs, or blades if you want to call them blades, and they include the web part. So we've got the web part tab, and on there is just 4 different options, and I'll explain what those 4 options do. We've then got the data source, and the data source tab is allowing us to configure what we're connecting to. So if we're connecting via search, which this one is doing, then notice how we're connecting or configuring a search query. However, if I was to jump back and choose the object model, that's going to change to configuring the object model in order to be able to bring back some content. And likewise with things like graph as well. So that data source tab just changes based on the type of query we're going to perform. The columns is all about which columns we want to select in order to be able to build our view. So you can literally go through and choose which ones you want. You can drag and drop them around and so on. We'll be taking a look at that. That looks mostly the same for each of the different data sources. There's some slight variations, but we'll cover that as we get to it. And then finally, on the display is where we're going to basically refine our display. We can set things like pagination and grouping and how we want to link to items, whether we want to show icons for documents. Also, we can set the display format, column aliases, and things like that too. And you can either do that work here, or you can also do it in the grid view if you are using the grid view. But bear in mind that this display tab might also change depending on the type of view that you're selecting. So if I was to jump back and change from a grid view to a JSON view, notice how that display view option is different. And again, we'll be exploring what to do in each of those scenarios. Okay, so let's jump straight back to the web part tab, and we'll explain all the different options in here. So the web part tab contains, first of all, the data source provider. This is how we're going to connect to the data in order to be able to aggregate it. So the 4 different options we have, first one up is the search rollup engine provider. Now the search engine rollup provider is basically going to give us access to SharePoint lists and libraries. So if we want to aggregate document libraries, or we want to aggregate SharePoint lists, we can do that using search. And that gives us multiple ways of actually querying that data, not just by specifying certain lists and certain libraries, but we can also do it on other types of result source, which we'll explore in just a moment. The main difference between that one and the object model rollup provider is that the object model rollup provider is performing a query in real time to get at the content. So it's not using the cached data that's inside the search index, it's actually working real time in order to be able to get you content. So therefore it's going to be slower than the search, and you can use this statistics information to determine whether it's going to be fast enough for you. But the main benefit is that it's going to give you that real-time update. So if somebody creates a new document or updates a property inside a document that you're aggregating from, or a list for that matter, we're going to see that change straight away. And yeah, the other two, so we've got the graph, which is used for connecting to things like Planner and To Do and OneDrive, etc. We'll have a look at that. So again, that's going to change the data source tab. And then finally, we've also got a Microsoft 365 group rollup engine provider, which is the same as the graph, except for you can get the best of both worlds here because we can actually go through and select which Microsoft 365 groups we want to set as the scope for that graph query. So we can navigate using the graph there as an option. So let's have a look at configuring each one of these. We're going to start off with the top one, which is search, and quite possibly the most complex one as well. So with the search, what we're going to do is go down to the data source tab, and depending on what you want to do, depends on how we're going to work with these result sources first of all. So you'll notice in here, these are all the result sources that come with SharePoint Search. And you can try them all out. The one that is most popular is the items matching a content type. That's going to give you access to SharePoint list and library content based on the content type that was used to create it. But you could also do things like items related to the current user. So that's a mixture of different items, different content types. It's just, maybe modified by the current user or created by the current user. You've also got pages that you can bring back and pictures and things like that too. So if you are aggregating from documents, I'd stay away from this option. And we actually throw up a warning as to why. The best one to use is going to be the items matching a content type. Now, when we select the items matching a content type, we of course have to tell it what content type. And the way that we would do that is by using the query template variables. So these query template variables are going to differ based on the result source that you choose. So hitting the drop down again, if I was to choose something like pages, for that matter, notice how we don't have a content type because it already knows the content type is going to be page. So when we choose the items matching a content type, it does want to know what content type. So you can basically just tell it. So you hit the ellipsis here and you choose the content type. So these are all the different content types in my environment. And we can go through each of those. This one here, by the way, is a custom one. So yes, that does include your custom content types as well. So we have sales proposals as a custom content type. So I'm going to choose document. So document covers off all the base level document types that you would get inside a document library. So I'm going to select that one. And we could also choose a scope as well. So if I don't set a scope, it's going to be tenant wide. That will be security trimmed tenant wide. But if we want to specify a certain scope for it to come from, I can select the site collections that I want it to be aggregated from. So we can basically go through and select that, but I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to leave it as a tenant-wide query. And then we also have tags that we can refine by as well. Now, jumping back up, so if we just close the query template variables, jumping back up to the query text, notice that we've got some query text by default, which just basically says, is it a SharePoint list item or is it a document? So yeah, it is either of those. So you could change that if you wanted to just is document is true to bring back documents, but it's not really going to matter for this case. We could also refine it in other ways as well. So notice you've got URL of current site collection. So we could choose that option and then add that to the query part as well. So this is how you can change the query text to change what results we're bringing back. But bear in mind, you can also do a lot of that with filters too, which is a lot easier. So we've then got some other options like query timeout. So if it's taking too long to bring back results, we can set a timeout. You can set an item limit as well. If you're in a multi-geo environment, you can have multiple search indexes, so we can enable the multi-geo. You can also enable audience targeting. So if documents were targeted to a specific audience, the current user that is viewing your view that you created is a member of that audience, then they will be served that document. Otherwise, they won't. There's query rules. So if you have created some query rules, you can work with those. There's query stemming as well. So the best way to describe that, if you were doing a search on particular metadata inside of your documents, you put, for example, it contained the word fished, then it may be returning fisher and fishing and so on as well. And there's the retrieve all items option too. So once we've gone through and set that, on search, when we go through to the columns view, you're not going to see the actual column names that you would see inside a document library. You're going to see managed properties, and the managed properties will differ slightly in the name. So notice the author, for example, is created by actually inside the document library. And as we scroll down, you'll also see things like size, which is file size. We've got title, which is name, and other ones as well, such as path and so on, that we could also add into the view. So once we've selected those, you can drag them into the order that you want them to appear in. We can also add custom managed properties as well. So if you click add here, if you've got a custom managed property, I've got one called product, I can give the name of it, the data type, and then add that managed property. And then we can go through and choose where that's going to appear in my view as well. Now, of course, you need to do a bit of work with that. So if you are working with managed properties, you can add a managed property by going through to the managed property. That will take you to the relevant place inside your SharePoint admin to configure the managed properties. So if you created a custom property, you could basically map that to one of these. So there's lots that aren't mapped, and you can map it to those, and then add it once you've given it the name that you're after. Okay, so that's how we can work with the managed properties as well. And then under display, this has jumped to the Java JSON option, so I'm going to change that back to grid view. So under display, we can set how we want to display the title. So I'm just going to set no file extension on that one. The author, I could have an avatar. The product, we'll just leave that as none. And size, we'll put that in kilobytes. So that's how I want to format my document. I could change the aliases as well. So we could say file name, and we could have it say created by if we want, and file size, so it looks more in line with what the user is going to expect to see. And we can also set things like column widths, grouping options, displaying options, and so on, and we'll go through all of those options a little bit later. I'll set a pagination to be 50 items per page, and under the grouping and linking, we'll set the title, so we can click onto the title name to open it. And if you are aggregating from a document library, it's also useful to show the document icon, and we can also group by folders automatically as well. Okay, so that's just some of the properties, and we'll go through more of these a little bit later, but let's just save that one. And here we go. Here's our document library aggregation using search, which as you can see has brought back 48 pages worth of documents, and we set the pagination to be 50 documents per page. And now from an end user perspective, we can filter on this, we can sort it, and so on. Okay, so that is our first view created with the advanced mode. Now let's jump back into another one. So we can label this view so we know what it is. So we'll call this documents by search. Okay, and I'm actually just going to throw in a tip here as well. And that is that you could always use the quick configuration. So I'm going to label this one documents QC for quick configuration, and then we'll simply go through and just set this one using search. So we'll say tenant search, and we could display avatars. And once I've created that, notice that we get our nice view. It's a bit better configured than mine, but we can then hit that cog and we're taken into the advanced mode. So now we can actually just refine as opposed to set from the very beginning, but you still get that granularity of the different options. I can still change the content type if I want to. I can change the columns that are being brought back and the display, and so on. Okay, so that's our second view. Now let's go in and create one on a list. So we'll do the tasks. So into advanced mode again. This time we're going to use the object model. So I'll choose the object model, we'll choose the grid view. Now when we're using the object model, notice in here that we can choose using the hierarchy of the content inside our tenant. So again, this is going to be security trimmed. If I hit the drop down, we've got those similar options to what you saw inside the quick configuration, but what this is doing is actually changing the granularity of this tree view here. So at the moment where it says show items from multiple sites, I can choose at site level the sites that I want to include in my content aggregation. So in the current site collection, if I wanted to choose just these 3 sites, I could select them. So those are the 3 selected sites. There is also a checkbox, and the checkbox allows me to check it, which if I check this one on regions like that, it's going to include anything in the future that may be created as a subsite of regions. So that means I don't have to keep coming in and reconfiguring it all the time as people add new sites. So as a new region appears, it will automatically be included inside our content aggregation. Now, I can't go any further than that, so I'm going to choose the show items from multiple lists, and notice how that expands the lists as well. So now I can be a bit more specific about which lists I want to include in my aggregation too. So we can check individual lists. Or we could be less granular and choose entire site collections, which again I could do. So now I can't actually navigate down to the site level. Okay, so if I choose that site collection, the current site collection, we'll do that. We'll choose the list type. So the list type is going to be tasks. We could refine by content type as well. So this shows me the content type group, and so this would be under the list content types. We could choose task, although telling it the list type was enough. The added advantage of that is if you do use content types that are deriving from this one, then you can include the child content types too. Now there is a column source. It's possible that one of the tasks lists inside of one of the sites, inside the site collection, has a custom column. And if that's not generic across all of the task lists that I'm aggregating from, I might want to select an instance of a task list that does contain the column that I'm after. So we could go through and do that. And that's the only real need for the column source, otherwise you can just ignore it. Settings wise, we can again choose an item limit. So that's in total how many items are going to be bought back. And then you've also got a limit per list as well. So we can choose the top 10 from each list or something along those lines. So there's a few different options there, refining the settings on the task list. And then when we get to columns, notice here that we've actually got the columns as they are inside the task list now. So we've got things like due date, percent complete, who it's created by, whether it's completed or not, and we can also choose things like the priority, the task name, the start date, etc. And again, we can drag these and drop them into the order that we want them to appear in. So I'm just going to drag the task name all the way up to the top there. There we go. You can set filters. We'll get more into the filters later on. And under display, again, just like what we did before, we can go through and set our display formatting. So start date, we might want to show that as a short date. Likewise with the due date. Created by, we could have the avatar. Completed, we could say that's a yes or no. Percent complete, we can show as a percent, and so on. So we can set all of those options. Again, we can also set things like the pages or pagination and how we want to link to the item. Now, a special tip for lists is you can actually have a modern side panel open up if you want, so you can turn that on. Otherwise, it's going to be the classic side panel. So I'm just going to set that one and choose save. So now you'll see that I can come down to tasks, and we've got our tasks there with the percent complete, whether it's completed or not, who it's created by, etc. Okay, so that's our second view, and obviously we could add conditional formatting and so on to this as well, which we'll do at a later date. Okay, so another option we're going to do using graph, and for this one I'm going to get into Planner. So in Planner, we will choose, the advanced mode. We're going to choose the graph rollup provider. And I'm also going to change this from grid view to JSON. Now under the data source tab, we're going to go through and choose planner plan. So that's a predefined entity type. And then we can add a query. So the query, either we can do a custom query or we can use one that we've created. So there is one called user planner plans, and we can select that. And there's the query. If you want to play around with these, you can use the Graph Explorer and then copy and paste your query from there. So under columns, notice how we've got all the different columns. So these are all available to select. But what I'm going to do is actually just come down to the JSON view and select the Planet Tasks. And let's save that. And notice how we've got our content coming from Planner displayed inside that JSON view. So that's how we can use the JSON view with the Microsoft Graph entity as well. Okay, so final one is going to be using Microsoft 365 groups. And I'll work with calendar events for this one. We're going to maybe have those in an agenda view. So when we go to the Microsoft 365 group rollup provider, I'll change again to JSON. Data source, we can go through and choose from something like show items from selected teams, and we can choose those teams. So whichever ones we want to add, I can add some from marketing. So we can add that one. The entity type is could be date range events. We can give it a date range, and the display is going to be an Outlook events agenda. So now when we come down to that view, notice how we've got those events being listed inside our view. Okay, so that's how we can use the advanced mode. We didn't cover adaptive cards in here as an option for displaying our content, but what we're going to do in the next series of videos is have a look at the data sources and also the view types, and we'll be covering the adaptive cards in greater detail in there. Okay, many thanks everybody. Take care.